on Monday, June 7th, 2021, as it's unfortunately going to be another solo stream. My guest, my planned guest for today had to reschedule, so hopefully that'll work out for next Monday. But nonetheless, we got a really big show ahead, a pretty big central theme here. A lot of it really centers around is it even really worth it to fight to elect better Democrats? And it'll be what I'll get into after I do a quick bit of promotion before we really get started. All right, a good and interesting Sunday night. Last night's stream with Sonny K and Kevin Kirby ran a bit long. But at the same time, I'm glad I didn't bother trying to watch that Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather fight after hearing about how one-sided that ended up being. And in fact, I haven't even bothered to look at highlights. It just wasn't worth it. And based on the numbers you saw from that fight, it's just another example of how a professional fighter with the training and experience of a Floyd Mayweather can make up for height and weight disadvantage. And when you're a YouTuber like Logan Paul, you're just not going to be to the point where you'll have a chance with trained boxers, at least not for like several years. And tonight is going to be an interesting night as well. We talked a lot about second round previews and how some of the first round eliminations followed in last night's Leftist Talk Sports Volume 2. And that was a good night, though. Now, just got to share that Facebook live stream and we'll be good to go. So I hope everyone is having a good Monday and easing their way into their weeks. I know I am. And I'll give shout outs to people who like, retweet, and share for more exposure. And if I don't notice it during this show, I will be sure to do it at the top of the following show I have. So I just wanted to make sure people know that because for some reason, last night when I was doing the show, it didn't. This HAPS broadcast studio did not show a comment from someone on Facebook Live, and I'll be sure to fix that in the future and be better about shouting out people. And it's almost time to get started. And I messed up there. Here, let's get that screen. Click. Now we've got it right. I'm not sure why the countdown screen popped up. Yeah, that was weird. So I'll just wait for this to clear off real quick, and then I think it'll finally be the right setup on for this. It's let's just forget about getting picture in picture done correctly, and let's just get to this first story on Joe Manchin and how he's opposing the Democratic Party's bill right now. So let's get into this first story. A key Democratic senator says he will not vote for the largest overhaul of U.S. election law in at least a generation, leaving no plausible path forward for legislation that his party and the White House have portrayed as crucial for protecting access to the ballot. Voting and election reform that is done in a partisan manner will all but ensure partisan divisions continue to deepen, said Joe Manchin wrote in a home state newspaper, the Charleston Gazette-Mail. He wrote that failure to bring both parties on voting legislation would risk further dividing and destroying the republic we swore to protect and defend as elected officials. The bill would restrict partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts, strike down hurdles to voting, and bring temporary transparency to a murky campaign finance system. Among dozens of other provisions, it would require states to offer 15 days of early voting and allow no excuse absentee balloting. Democrats have pushed the legislation as the antidote to a wave of restricted state voting laws sweeping the country, many inspired by President Donald Trump's false claims of fraud in his 2020 election loss. Senator Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has pledged to bring the election bill to a vote the week of June 21st, testing where senators stand, but without Manchin's support, the bill has no chance of advancing. Republicans are united against it. In appearances on two Sunday news shows, Manchin stressed his reasons for opposing the bill, thinking that his view is too broad. I think it's the wrong piece of legislation to bring our country together and unite our country. I'm not supporting that because I think it will divide us further, Manchin said. He also said he believes Republicans will see the need for a bipartisan deal. And if they think they're going to win by subverting and oppressing people from voting, They're going to lose. I assure you they will lose. Manchin said lawmakers should instead focus their energies on revitalizing the landmark Voting Rights Act, which was weakened by a Supreme Court decision in 2013. Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska has joined him in calling for that approach. Manchin's opposition to the broader elections bill is just the latest challenge facing Democrats as they debate how to deliver their promises to voters. Manchin reiterated he would not vote weaken or eliminate the filibuster, a route that requires Democrats see as the only realistic path forward. The filibuster rule requires 60 votes to pass most bills, and in today's Senate, which is split 50-50, that means many of the Democrats' biggest priorities, from voting rights to gun control, are dead or on arrival. Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona have frustrated their party by their defense of the filibuster. But they aren't alone, with as many as 10 Democratic senators also reluctant to change the rules. President Joe Biden this week used the 100th anniversary of Tulsa's race massacre to make a plea for legislation to protect the right to vote, which comes as Republican-led administrations in Texas and other states pass new restrictions, making it tougher to cast ballots. Biden also seemed to call out Manchin and Sinema for stalling action on voting measures, though he has said he wants to end the filibuster. And there's one more key point I want to focus in on that article. All right, that it doesn't say it directly in it, but the point is, it's not just Senator Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema who are being the main forces of obstruction to the Democratic Party right now. In fact, there's at least 8 others who are less vocal of their opposition against doing anything, even just passing merely their own agenda to get things done. And with that being said, you got to imagine that there even be a lot more Democrats who don't even have to be vocally or even quietly opposed. Their type of opposition is so hidden that they'll just go along with it. And the big term that has been brought out is the whole villain opposition. Even though Joe Manchin has never been the even left of center, he's always been your medium right-wing Democrat, and he's pretty close. He's really close to Biden's right. Those are the two guys who represent the furthest right of the Democratic Party. Then you've got Kristen Sinema, who started off in the Green Party, and now she is relatively catching up to the pace of where those two guys are at. But right now, Joe Manchin is getting to live out being the top heel of the Democratic Party. What amazes me is how so many people continue to fall for the scam of just the Democratic Party continuing to kick all their agenda further down the road. Look, it doesn't matter if it's the progressive agenda that the left would want, like Medicare for all, defund the police, Green New Deal, universal income, reparations, or if it's establishment-led agenda, such as the January 6th investigation, this whole service level voting rights act fight. The fact is, they're just going to further kick it down the road, force the people to remain on the hamster wheel of voting. And I can see right through that. And the part that doesn't make sense to me is how many people can't pull themselves off this hamster wheel called the Democratic Party, the two-party system, the oligarchy that forces you to be on this. And the comparison I'm going to go with is the amount of people who still continuously fall for this, but are probably among the first people to call wrestling fake and stupid while not acknowledging that they still like other fake and scripted programming. And Joe Manchin right now, he's getting to play the top heel. He's living out the Shawn Michaels throws Marty Jannetty through the barbershop window. He's getting to be the Seth Rollins who turns on the Shield. And the fact that no one can see through that so few people can't figure out the kayfabe that is going on with all this theater you see in the House and Senate and the White House. And the way to break through it is to disengage. And we are still in the process on the left of trying to make people more aware of this shit. Come on. And the point is, there's a lot of hypocrisy with the way that the Democratic Party has bungled a lot of their trying to pass their shit through. The hypocrisy of not wanting to abolish the filibuster. You would think even if they were half serious about using that filibuster, that they would at least get rid of it to pass their establishment-led agenda that really does nothing to help the people. And that's the part that frustrates people, because let's be honest, the Democratic Party really doesn't have to do a lot to maintain their voters as it stands, because the left doesn't have that type of influence yet. in spite of how much we are trying to raise awareness on the grift that is taking place and the scam of the two-party system. All right, here's a tweet from Jamel Hill. This is so on brand for this country. Record number of black voters show up to save this democracy, only for white supremacy to be upheld by a cowardly, power-hungry white dude. Senator Joe Manchin is a clown. All right, so I think that Jamel is accurate on this point. The issue with Jamel Hill is she is hyper liberal that mainly makes uh, criticisms of the Republican Party. And this was one of her few moments where she makes a pretty accurate statement on the Democratic Party. But the problem with this is that the truth is she only provides surface level criticisms when it comes to her politics. And the fact that I'm sure that even despite of this criticism, she will continue to be a loyal Democratic voter. And the problem is that those record number of black voters probably aren't going to fight through voter oppression to show up and help the Democratic Party do more of failure and letting the people down. Especially when they see that both parties carry the agenda of white supremacy. The only difference is the Democratic Party gets more people of color to carry out that same agenda, and that people think it's different than what many of the same white politicians are doing. So, yeah, I wanted to expose that tweet because even though it's more than a day old, it is still a top trend on Twitter. And Jamel Hill represents that group of liberals that can call out racism and white supremacy. But the problem is they don't offer solutions or strategy as a true way to counter that. And the other issue is, as I've said before, the woke liberals are part of being so fixated on racism that you don't you lose the plot when it comes to doing things that win. And the fact of the matter is, no matter how much of a left wing agenda we push through, there will always be racist. The point is it better to win or is it better to be upset at the minimum of 15% of racist white people in this country who probably are going to be racist no matter what. But it's more important, in my opinion, to properly oppose the racism and do things that will improve the racial gaps and the class system that we currently have from this failed hell state of late capitalism. And here's the tweet from Ohio House candidate, Senator Nina Turner. Her answer is elect better Democrats. And my point for this was I felt like this was a great central theme for the title of today's show on because I think a lot of everything here ties down to the theme of elect better Democrats. And Nina Turner is one of the top faces for that right now. A lot of the left is down on electoralism. I'm personally down on the people aspect of it, which is why I've been on record as suggesting to redirect those electoral efforts in ways that are policy focused and not people focused. And tweets like these, the rhetoric of elect better Democrats, is designed to keep you engaged with the idea of the two-party system. The problem is we do not have enough people ready to apply outside pressure. And we really must start doing it. Because in 2024, the DNC is not going to give us a choice of the progressive politician. They're going to block it. None of your favorite progressives within the Democratic Party are going to challenge either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. I've said this on my Twitter account right after the election ended. Even before it was certain that a Joe Biden victory was set in stone. Because when the party that wins is trying to have their president run for the second term, they do not get a real challenger, bottom line. You saw this there were a couple outsider conservatives who were ready to challenge Donald Trump. And neither of them gained real traction, and they just got obstructed from making a real challenge. And they even suspended their campaign so early that by the time that they had their primary, Donald Trump's name was the only name on the ballot. And the fact is, well, I'm certain that there's going to be a progressive who will attempt to challenge the Democrats from outside the party. What I am certain about is they won't be allowed to make a credible challenge. And this is why we got to be prepared to build up a third party. And the hard part is the left is also so divided on which party it will be. Obviously, the Green Party has the better inside track at the moment. But the problem is, will the people in charge of that party allow us on the left to change it for the better? Yeah, and that's the questionable part because that's why the People's Party got started, is because of people no longer believing in the Green Party. But there's also problems with the People's Party as well, and why I will be reluctant to support them due to the party being anti-black right now, and we just can't have a generic populist party. We need a party that prioritizes black liberation for other people of color as well, because we just aren't gonna get anywhere with just generic populism. And that's why I probably I'm currently not leaning towards not supporting the People's Party candidate for that reason. And we've seen what the examples of other countries who just leaned hard into populism but haven't really made progress on racism. The fact is, you got to be able to have those issues work hand in hand in order to make the true transformation that this society needs right now. Got another tweet to put up, and this one will be from Jeff Stein. Senator Jim Kane of Virginia tells Benji Sarlin about White House approach to his public option health plan. We don't have a green light. I think they're frankly so focused on infrastructure and voting rights for right now, so it may be a bit. And that's another example of a Democratic-led agenda and how they're even fumbling their own priorities on stuff that the people don't particularly want. And they're getting to the point where they keep lowering and lowering that infrastructure plan, where it in reality should be about $10 trillion, and that number has been whittled down to 1.7. And it goes back to the whole bullshit excuse of being bipartisan. Look, bipartisan is a one-way street. And it's always a one-way street to hell for Democrats. Then when Republicans take back over, they always put the gate back up on that one-way street. And you've got all these Democrats talk about bipartisanship. Tim Kaine, Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema. That's the excuse they hide behind right now. And you have to call their bluff. Because it's not the right move for them. It's a one-way street. Bipartisanship is pointless because Republicans have solidarity. They never vote for it regardless of how much the bill is negotiated, compromised on in order to get 0 votes. We don't know what the real priorities of the Democratic Party is, as frustrating as that is to say. Tim Kaine also mentioned that public option. It's weird how that's suddenly getting brought up since Joe Biden abandoned it towards the end of his campaign. But I've got to get into that a bit more. Healthcare will be coming up a couple more times. But first, got to go through this Brian Stelter video with the press secretary, Jen Psaki.
Mike, thanks for coming to the sources.
My pleasure.
Busy summer ahead, infrastructure, election reform. What does the press get wrong when covering Biden's agenda? When you watch the news, when you read the news, what do you think we get wrong?
Well, look, I think some of our muscles have atrophied a little bit over the last few years, and there isn't a lot of memory, or recent memory, or longer memory on how long it takes to get legislation forward, or how messy the process of negotiating and the process of getting legislation across the finish line can be. So we understand that he's always looking for a deadline, a timeline, things like that, but at the end of the day, our focus is on getting these bills across the finish line, doing it in a bipartisan way if we can. And we certainly recognize that that can be messy along the process. So I don't know if that's the press getting it wrong. I'll leave you to the critique of that, Brian, but I think sometimes we forget how strange the last 4 years were, and when we return to a place where democracy is working, where we're talking with Democrats and Republicans, where we're trying to get bills and legislation passed, it feels foreign, but this is actually how it's supposed to work.
There are times in your briefings where you seem so comfortable. Then there's times where you seem frustrated by the lines of questions.
Oh, that was Jen Psaki manufacturing consent to the whole idea of the process of how getting bills through the White House works. That's just pretty much a long-winded form of saying that we just really obstruct each other all the time and we don't like to get much done. And she is manufacturing consent to the whole bipartisanship lie. And the thing that makes that worse is pathetic Brian Stelter pretend having no backbone and lacking complete assertiveness by giving the Saki the chance to push even more PR, because that essentially is what it is. The White House is a place where very little gets done. House Congress members make about $175,000 a year. It seems like they take 6 to 8 vacations a year. Then you see a bunch of obstructionalism that she tries to call lengthy negotiations. She just let people in on the problem with national politics, the House, the Senate, and how we really got to change how things work up there. And it's also the why we have to really change our approach. They're forcing us into doing things locally, state by state. That's because it's so far gone. But I will know one thing. There won't be no falling for the bluff of, oh, it's just simple. You got to elect more Democrats. Fact is, you've got to be prepared for Democrats to get slaughtered in these midterms. It's just pretty much fact. As my guest Kamali Rose said on Friday, the party with the president just about always loses seats. And a positive outcome just means retaining. And as you break down many of the failures that Democratic Party has had, they would have to do a whole lot more than they have done now. They started off early by breaking the promise of the $2,000 checks and cutting that down to $1,400, saying that it was really that you got 600 already from Republicans. The whole total of 2,000. And I'll tell you right now that even if they had maintained that promise of the $2,000 checks, that still wouldn't have been enough. Joe Biden being on record of cutting $10,000 of student debt, being unclear of whether he would do it via executive order or Senate, guess what? Joe Biden is deflecting and saying that it is up to his Senate to do. The same Senate that he won't force to fall in line. And even if $10,000 did pass, it still wouldn't protect the Democratic Party from what's about to happen to him in the midterms. If they pass if they get through their agenda on January 6th, which, by the way, is just a ploy to increase the security state in the way that Republicans used 9/11 to do, that isn't going to gain you extra voters and still won't help you protect from the midterm loss. The $15 minimum wage that President Joe Biden has been pretty strongly in rhetoric for, but so weak in action, that may be something that could hold off losses. A actual public option may be something that could hold off losses. But the problem is, the crumbs that they're giving you aren't going to do that. Then when they have the opportunity to present you a slice of cake instead of crumbs, they won't do it. In fact, let's go to this video of President Biden and Barack Obama celebrating Obamacare.
Really good news, folks. Great news. 30 million people are now covered by the Affordable Care Act. And I know someone who's
Mr. President.
Hey, Mr. President, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing good, man. How you doing? Joe, we always talked about how if we could get principle of universal coverage established, we could build on it. And I just want to say how proud I am of what you've done now with the American Rescue Plan.
When we open up the enrollment period and reduce the cost, 1.2 million people signed up on top of 30 million. And look how many times they try to defeat your legislation.
ACA, later known as Obamacare, which I take pride in.
And I keep reminding people.
It was built on a model that combined good ideas from Democrats and Republicans. You know, you and I have both had some tragic, illnesses in our families. We know what it's like emotionally, and that's compounded if a family, when somebody who they love deeply gets sick, is now also trying to figure out, how do I pay the bills? Can I get the best treatment? Am I going to have to mortgage my house? Am I going to have to drain all my retirement savings?
So you were so good with Bo was dying. I literally remember sitting on the bed with him within a week or so of him passing away, and thinking, what in God's name would I do if I got a notice from the insurance saying about coverage?
The effort with the families, access to care. That all makes it worthwhile. So I just want to thank your administration and all the folks who've been working on this for now building on it and continuing to expand it.
Try to dime for everyone who said to me over the last 2 years campaigning and as president, tell the president, meaning you, I said thank you. It saved my life. It saved my. No, I mean it.
That's good. That's because I had a good partner, and because of what you've done, Joe. The special enrollment period is still open until August 15th. So anybody who's watching us in this conversation and still hasn't looked into it, go to healthcare.gov. Healthcare.gov works like a charm these days. Mr. President, thank you for doing what you're doing. I'm proud of you. Keep it up. We're going to get even more people covered in the years to come under your guidance. Love you, man.
I'm still going to call you for advice.
See you, brother.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yuck, is what I gotta say about that. President Barack Obama, you have to keep in mind, his Affordable Care Act came from Republicans, and it was originally crafted by the Heritage Foundation, a bill started by Mitt Romney. So there's a reason why Joe Biden didn't push harder for the public option, even though we think it would have likely ultimately failed with the way that Democrats dumbly trust the process of the working its way up through House and Senate. And you can tell look at the bold-faced lie that Joe Biden said about Obamacare saving his life. You're a rich politician. You don't need Obamacare to save you. And it still sickens me how he would weaponize the death of his son as a way to maintain this insurance-based healthcare system when it should really be you should really be using that as a means of striving for universal health care. And you've got shit libs who will give the applause for them for increasing access. Healthcare is a human right, but you have to pay for access. No. The fact is, I think that video is really revealing that Joe Biden's expansions will probably come at the expense of the people. Whatever that Obamacare expansion is, we really don't know what it would be just yet. But it's clear to me that whatever it is, it's not going to be beneficial to the people. And it's only going to be beneficial to big pharma and the private insurance companies. So don't let yourself fall for believing that they actually have real experience with the private healthcare insurance that they offer. The fact is, they're rich. They can work around private healthcare. That system doesn't work for us, the people. What works for us will be universal healthcare. Because at least 50 to 70,000 people each year die due to either no or lack of quality healthcare coverage. And it comes down to not having the money for it, not having their expenses covered. All right, this is probably a good way to sum up what I've been saying so far in today's episode of the Rochford Files. From Caitlin Johnstone. Electoral politics is decoy revolution. Don't like the status quo? Elect Obama for hope and change. Still dislike the status quo? Elect Trump. He'll fight the establishment. Oh no, Trump's a fascist. Quick, fight fascism by electing Biden, and you elect the status quo either time. That right there is the goal of what I've been trying to say for a large portion of today's episode of the Rochford Files. It is a hamster wheel. Look, it doesn't matter if you're a loyal Democratic voter, a loyal Republican voter, even a loyal Green or Libertarian voter. The point is, you're just running along the hamster wheel if you continue to play by the rules of their game. That means you've got to be able to adapt a new strategy, which is why I've been saying that we have to make a change to a people-based strategy, not a people-based strategy. We have to de-emphasize the people for a long time. If we change our electoral path, it's got to be based in direct action policy, starting the general strike when we have the raw numbers to make it work. And right now, we've still got to spread awareness. And there's still a whole lot of work to be done on that front. The most important thing going forward is to make sure people don't forget about the shortcomings of the Democratic Party and the shortcomings of the Republican Party, because even though if you're a loyal Republican voter, they do more to please their base comparative to the people who vote Democrats, but they still come up pretty short for them as well. And I will be honest in acknowledging that. There's a right wing that once wars ended. And that was one of the big promises Donald Trump failed on. There's a right wing that wants universal health care just like the left. And if you look in other countries, they're right extreme. The United States is an extreme right compared to countries with universal health care because universal health care is not something that right wing parties fight to abolish. They still got a form of theirs as well. And that's the long and short of it. There's going to be more short-term pain from going forward, but the path is to switch on over to applying pressure from the outside and making your electoral strategy based in policy and not people who you can't trust. And just the facts. There are almost no good politicians. Definitely none at the national level. Your only shot at having decent politicians is at the local level. And before I get into Charles Barkley and some political comments he made from over the weekend, I will be headed to the restroom real quick. All right, I'm back. Now I'm going to try to get a little promotion in before I jump into this next topic of Charles Barkley and some political comments he made on Dan Le Batard's Freedom 24-hour stream as the premiere of their partnership with DraftKings. So give me a moment to get into that real quick. All right. So on Friday, Dan Le Batard and friends kicked off his DraftKings partnership with a 24-hour stream called Freedom. And Charles Barkley was among their deep group of guests. So I'm going to break down those comments for y'all.
Happening in the league, Charles, and you see the evolution of ratings dropping and people linking the opinions of black players to the ratings decline, and how strong and firm and politically active, racially active the league is at the height of some of the things happening in America. Do you think those two things are associated? Do you believe that the ratings decline, even though ratings are declining all over the place because of streaming and everything else? Do you think the ratings decline is tied to the black players being too vocally black?
Yes. I think that people watch sports, Dan, to get away from reality. That's what they do. Like, I don't care how bad your life sucks. When your team is doing good, you in a good mood, you're proud, your city's on fire, your city's on fire. But if you turn on your television every time, and guys who are making 30, 40, $50 million are telling you stuff. Like, and also, I think you have to realize something. All these people have lost their jobs. They have lost their businesses. I mean, this is a unique situation. Man, I feel, first of all, we lost some loved ones. I mean, think about it. You got all your relatives dying. You lost your job. Your badass kids at home with you every day. I think it was so funny during the pandemic. I was playing golf with my friends. They're like, yo, man, I think something wrong with my kids. They're crazy as hell. So they have to spend every single day with those kids. And I think that, I think the problem with the NBA, and I've said this publicly, and I just said this, you have to realize, Dan, I want you to be an ally of mine.
Let's first, before Charles jumps into another subset of his statements, you have to keep in mind with Charles Barkley is you usually have to have a lot of nuance when it comes to dissecting his political statements. The first part is him saying that he thinks these athletes are trying to push pro-black agenda too much, and the fact that with and people watch sports to get away from it. Guess what? The moments of political activism are only a small moment relative to the sports themselves. And I know that they are going to use their moments to raise awareness. But at the same time, it's not going to affect my ability to take a break from what's going on in our political society right now. And there's just so many people that are incapable of doing that. In the grand scheme of things, those moments of political activism are very small in comparison to the actual game itself. And it doesn't matter whether you're someone like me who's capable of understanding that, or if you're someone who isn't and ends up canceling all the things that they like, the ways that they allow themselves to break through their cycle. Because for me in the daytime, whether it's watching or creating independent left content, then you get in the nighttime. Sometimes you go out and run errands. Other times, watch sports. Then later at night, catch up on more independent left content that happened while sports was on. I'll tell you, that's been my routine a lot. And another point that Charles Barkley got into from this is the whole people don't want to hear about problems from millionaires. Look, I've been out of a job since the early part of the pandemic last year. But the one thing I won't do is punch at people saying the problems of the working class are more important, and therefore when millionaires bring up their issues, they don't matter. I disagree. There is room for this world to acknowledge the problems of the poor working class and the problems of the millionaire working class, which in fact sometimes those millionaire athletes are shining light on the problems of the poor working class as well. So there in fact is the other issue that Charles Barkley poses in that first part of his statement right there is then he talks about quarantine life, and I still don't think his point is effective, because I still believe you can let go of the small moments of political activism from athletes and still allow yourself the opportunity to get away. Or if you're like me, you can appreciate those moments when you agree with them, disagree with them, but don't allow yourself to cancel sports when you disagree with the form of activism, and still allow yourself the opportunity to get away from use sports as a break as well. Although one thing that he did get right in that first statement is the success of your sports team does cover up a lot of the problems you may have. It'll get you amped up when your team is doing good and you only manage to sleep 4 hours, but then you know there's a big game tonight, and with that amp up in your brain, it's going to prevent you from getting tired and being tempted to taking a nap. Let's hear more from Charles.
I don't want to alienate you. I want you to be an ally. I think a lot of times these guys, they're alienating the fans and people, not just fans. It's like I want all this stuff that's been fucked up for 400 years. I want it fixed tomorrow. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And so I use this analogy all the time. Anybody want to help black people, Hispanics, please help me. I'm not going to be yelling at you because you had nothing to do with this stuff that was set up 400 years ago. I'm not going to sit around yelling at you about these damn Confederate statues. That's a waste of my energy.
All right, so I'm going to start with that last part that he said first. The whole Confederate statues thing. Even though it's a visual positive to not have Confederate statues staring in the face of black people as they walk by, they're mainly symbolic victories. And if there's one thing that came from Black Lives Matter protest last summer, most of the victories were symbolic. And symbolic victories don't amount to anything. Here's where I disagree with Charles on this next part. The whole alienating of allies. Here's the issue. Still trying to work on, black people are still trying to build their allies, and guess what? Not every approach to ally building is going to be kind and compassionate. There's going to be moments where it's more hard hitting, aggressive, critical, and it's going to call white people out. Trust me, I understand this. And instead, I think it points out white fragility. And what you'll see a lot among white conservatives is when black people try to call out problems within the white community and their treatment of them, the typical white response is to get defensive. The issue here is there's still a majority of white people in this country that take the defensive stance anytime black people bring up problems with racism and their treatment. While you've got a minority of white people that is like, yes, I understand. You've got a great point. Fortunately, some of those people are liberals, and some of them only tend to agree with the black people when Republicans are in charge. Then you've got, so that even cuts down the better white allies even more, due to the fact that when it comes down to it, you really do have to be opposed to both parties when it comes to achieving black liberation. Then the last thing I'll add here is when Charles Barkley brings up the whole issues from 400 years ago and how people today aren't responsible for them, that's technically not true. When that response is made, that tends to let people off the hook. That's the problem with that mentality. You've made minimal progress to improve the lives of black people, but when you don't acknowledge the issues that haven't changed in the 400 years that they've had to endure slavery, and how they've had to morph and reform slavery and marginally improve their freedom, it lets a lot of people off the hook for further improvement. And there's that whole, and when Charles Barkley said that the demand sounded like we want this tomorrow, that's a false pretense. I think anyone in the movement for Black Lives Matter, the people, not the leadership, they know that things aren't going to happen overnight. But what they do know is there's not a lot of time to make that change happen. And that's what they want more people to get. It's a sense of urgency, not an unreasonable demand.
So anybody want to help me help black people? I'm all in. Anybody want to help me help Hispanics? I'm all in. But I'm not going to yell at you, Dan. I'm not going to yell at you, Stu or Mike, because this shit started 400 years ago. So, and it's not going to be quick. It hadn't been fixed. I mean, you look at now. Think about it. I told, like, all these guys are running around pumping themselves with chest and tell us, man, we all made a difference. You know what your politicians been doing? Changing the election law. Let's change the law. But we've been running around pumping our chests and like, well, all this stuff we did in the bubble and all our social activism. I said, yo man, we need to take a step back to this. We need to listen. Stuff that happened in history is awful. Awful. Can you help me make it better? That to me is a better way to go about it than like, nah, I want all this shit changed tomorrow. I want all these statues taken down. Because they're like, hey, I had nothing to do with that. So I think the NBA, I think their heart is in the right place. I think the players' heart is in the right place. But the big thing they're missing is everybody here had nothing to do with the shit that was set up hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And we're yelling at them like, I need you to listen to me. I want your help. To me, that's a better way to go about it. Yelling and screaming at people. And I think the NBA has kind of lost that. They're like, no.
All right, I'll concede. One of the better points Charles Barkley has made here is that the yelling and screaming approach isn't always going to work. But I think he kind of leaves some holes in the potential solutions. Like, technically, you aren't directly responsible for the stuff that happened 400 years ago. But here's the things that still haven't changed. And here's the way that the ruling class is responsible for continue to carry those things on. I think that's a bit more of an expanded approach here. From a people standpoint, yeah, he is right that they aren't responsible. And maybe you'll get more people to understand it when you frame it through the lens of the ruling class, because that's what really hasn't changed. But the thing is, there are certain parts of the issues where people just really haven't changed enough. And I think that's where Charles Barkley lets people off the hook. I think he also made a better point where everything that happened in the bubble, it really didn't work out that well. Look, you had watered down slogans on the back of your uniforms, the symbolism of Black Lives Matter on the court. You folded at an opportunity for creating energy for a real strike in this country. Seriously. The NBA had a chance to create a real general strike. But no. They had to be convinced by Barack Obama to stop. Then to be placated by, oh, we'll just make most of your arenas available for polling during the next election. And only that election as well. Then it reduce the trickle-down effect. It made it seem like when other sports got on board with it, it really reduced it to like a social media challenge when they tried to strike in solidarity with them. So, yeah, I also agree that the NBA and the players, they tend to have their heart in the right place. But the reason why I started the Rochford Files is to make sure people know that NBA players and other athletes and their political activism isn't always going in the right direction. But instead of what you commonly see is people calling that out from their right, they need to hear more left-wing media people call that out from their left. Somebody like a Justin Jackson will do that. Occasionally you'll see people like Nico House, Kyle Kulinski do it as well, because if there's one thing that the left media space doesn't have much, it's oh yeah, I forgot. Pasta Jardula, he will do it as well. But the point is, it's hard to find left-wing media personalities who will frequently talk about the political crossover, and you'll probably, the closest you'll get is Dave Zirin. By the way, if you haven't watched it yet, y'all should go check out his interview that got released on the Vanguard last week. Another group that will talk sports a bit more than your average lefty media voice. But before I get too far off on a tangent, I think that just exposes where there's room for opportunity, and I'd like to get more people who identify with being a sports fan to be more politically engaged like I am. Even though the pandemic really accelerated it, I think it really helped to experience the second time that the DNC prevented Bernie Sanders from winning the primary, and that's another thing that motivated my further move to the left. In addition to the protest over last summer, I think those protests were the difference in me being somewhere between socialism and communism. I would consider myself a hybrid socialist communist, and being stuck as a social democrat. I firmly do believe if not for those events, I probably stuck as a social democrat, minus some of the bird brain thinking that you see a lot from them right now, which I'll expose in my last segment. Let's resume with Chuck.
Just gonna beat you over the head. Just like, a normal person gonna be like, no, I don't want to beat over the head. I have to
All right, I didn't realize that it just ended right there, and you pretty much got to beat people over the head with it. I think that you can't have a one size all fits all approach to how you increase awareness with these issues, because some people will respond well to the aggressive screaming approach. And that's why, for example, back to Force the Vote, when you hear Jimmy Dore yelling and screaming on a weekly basis, it's what worked really well. But then you also got people who get really turned away from the aggressive, abrasive personalities of Jimmy Dore. Then they respond better to a kind, well-hearted intellect type like Brianna Joy Gray. And then you have people who try to be more level-headed but have this similar messaging. And I feel like so far I've displayed the level-headed voice. And when you hear things come from people who maintain more level-headedness, I think that will resonate as well. In addition to getting people out of the idea of the electoralism scam, the increase of awareness is the next one. Oh, we've got an update on the New York City mayor race. That's been quite the dumpster fire. So right now, Eric Adams is in first place at 22%, Andrew Yang second at 16%, Catherine Garcia is at 15%, Scott Stringer 10%, Maya Wiley 9%, Diana Morales 5%, then Ray for mayor's at 4%, and that's Ray McGuire, and Sean Donovan down at 3%. 16% undecided. If you saw the Bad Faith special live stream from Friday with Brianna Joy Gray, Virgil Texas, which featured guests Trevor Boyu and Katie Halper, they went through how the developments in this race have really been a dumpster fire. With the recent accusations that have hit Scott Stringer and how they've weaponized the smear tax that worked so well in preventing Tara Reid from getting heard from her issues with sexual harassment from Joe Biden. Then you've got Maya Wiley, a fake progressive who has called out Bernie Bros in the past. The unfortunate part is the further progressives that are in this race are Elizabeth Warren style progressives. Even Diane Morales has had those tendencies as well. And people are now questioning how genuine her progressive campaign is as of late. Scott Stringer was supposed to be kind of progressive, but now a sexual harassment scandal has hit him. And now he has found himself in deep water with the left now that he is weaponizing Tara Reid's name. Catherine Garcia is kind of there, but she's really just the more reasonable neoliberal in comparison to Andrew Yang and Eric Adams. And then the bottom of the race, Sean Donovan, learning that he has one of the best plans to improve wealth inequality. He just hasn't gained traction, and I think it's an election that gets high profile nationally, as this will be the first election ranked choice in New York, and you get to rank 5 people. And I'm telling you, if there's people in New York watching, whatever you do, leave Eric Adams and Andrew Yang unranked. They're clearly the 2 worst candidates that you've got in this race. Adams is the cop who will continue to weaponize the police state on black and brown people. Andrew Yang, the fake center populist, even a fake right-wing libertarian. He's going to try to tear down social programs, shrinking them. And both those guys are very pro-Israel when you would want someone who has Palestinian solidarity. But it's really more of a dumpster fire because of all the problems that the more left candidates have. But once you get down to if you can leave both Adams and Yang off your rankings, then I think among those other 6 candidates, I think the only one that I think the next one you leave off, I think it's really just a crapshoot between either Catherine Garcia or Scott Stringer. And on my personal principle, that last candidate I'd leave off would be Scott Stringer. Even in spite of the issue that Diane Morales has, I would still reluctantly rank her first. And then I would consider ranking Sean Donovan second. Probably go Garcia third at best. And McGuire fourth. And Wiley fifth. If I were in New York, that would be the way I would lean in ranking my 5 candidates. And it's unfortunate that even in New York, where you've seen more progress made on progressive transformation, they can still force the 2 shittiest candidates on the people. Yep, that's right. When I say that it wouldn't matter if the one party would be Democrat, when you're in a state with a one-party stranglehold like New York City, guess what? The Republicans just run as Democrats. And that's why New York continuously has bad mayors, whether it's Rudy Giuliani, Bill de Blasio. That's because this system recognizes when the best chance to win is that. And when it comes down to it, all you have to do is adopt rhetoric that is more inclusive in comparison to your average Republican, but you can still pass a lot of the Republican agenda. In fact, the last Denver mayor race, I seen that come into effect when Michael Hancock ran for re-election. I voted for one of the most progressive candidates in the original election, but the issue was the candidate I picked came in 3rd place, and there was no majority, and therefore the incumbent establishment Democrat Mayor Hancock and his opponent, who just converted into a Republican, the race just came down to those 2. And I left that. Then on the next go around, I left it blank. Because even though the lesser of 2 evils principle has more validity when it comes to your mayor and governor, I still reserve the right to say that it doesn't matter in certain situations. So that's all I can say for now until we hear further developments. And I hope that people will use the power of ranked choice voting for good and not for voting for garbage candidates like Yang and Eric Adams. So yesterday, Samira Khan started some discourse on Medicare for all versus the national healthcare system. So she said, Medicare for all is trash. Pass it on. You're going to see she struck a nerve with a lot of the DSA stands. And that point is that why are we continuing to fight for the compromise. I mean, I think some people are interpreting it the wrong way. I think that people on our left understand the point that was being made and how a lot of DSA personalities have lost the plot on healthcare and national healthcare is flat out better than Medicare for all. Problem is, people just don't get that. And we've seen what happens when you get caught up in fighting for the compromise over using the effects of the Overton window to pull people further left. Going back to the $15 minimum wage. What we should have been doing is asking for $25 minimum wage. You know what happens when you only fight for the compromise? That means you're only getting $11 or $12 an hour. Is reportedly what people that oppose the $15 minimum wage, like Senator Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, were reportedly more for. And you're seeing too much fear mongering. And I think one reason why those people don't do that is because they get fear mongered into being crazy and unreasonable. The thing is, Republicans, they don't care, and the right wing, they don't care if their ideas are considered unreasonable. They're going to push. They've effectively shifted the Overton window to their right by arguing for unreasonable positions. And I know there's people opposite of us right now that consider defund the police unreasonable, Medicare for all unreasonable, and they're still going to consider it unreasonable even when we demand for abolishing the police or nationalized healthcare system. But guess what? When we argue for the furthest left thing, oh, abolish police? I guess defunding sounds more reasonable to me now. $25 minimum wage? Well, $16 an hour sounds more reasonable in comparison. Nationalized healthcare system? Are you crazy? We don't want the government running that shit. I think Medicare for all sounds pretty solid. Private insurance still can exist. And what was worse is there's actual DSA people arguing, telling their people right now that Medicare for all is to the left of national healthcare system. Get the fuck out of here with that. Even though people don't consider Samira Khan to be a very reasonable person, yesterday at the beginning of James Fauntleroy, JB Font, or the Fred Hampton left on his show, guess what? He was advocating for nationalized healthcare system as well. And that's the problem with right now with the left. There's people that are convinced that you can only go as far as the compromise. And I'm telling you right now, we have to stop arguing from the position of compromise. We have to start from the position of the furthest left we can go. Then, as you'll see Samira Khan make another point, is she was supportive of force the vote. But it's also fair to acknowledge as a supporter of force the vote, even if you support Medicare for all, that at the end of the day, it's only the compromise, and it's designed to use our compromise positions to be the road to the further left policy point. And she is a woman that gets a lot of the shitty, bad faith attacks, just like Jimmy Dore, just like how the synthetic left has turned on Breonna Joy Gray after being so aggressively for force the vote. Fiorella Isabel of the Convo Couch also gets a lot of these vicious attacks. And the worst part of it is people are really going to come out and call you a right winger for being against challenging the platform from the left. And that type of bird brain logic's got to stop. The plot is being lost. And the frustrating part is it makes our left even smaller than what it should be. And if there's anything that we are learning, is you don't shift the Overton window with compromise positions. You shift it with going as far left as you can possibly go. Then you can work from the compromise position to the further left standpoint. And that's that for the Rochford files today. Wow, that was a longer show than I expected it to be today. I went off on a couple tangents, but I think it was very purposeful overall. So this is my Patreon page. Please go to patreon.com/the Rochford Files. So here's my support levels: casual fan, bandwagoner, and diehard. And I'm still waiting for my first supporter. So I will appreciate whoever eventually decides to support the channel. I'll be sure to shout my Patreon supporters out, just like I will with people who help share and help the Rochford Files grow in exposure. So please go to the Rochford Files on YouTube and subscribe to the page, click the bell. Help me grow my subscriber base. Go through my videos. Help give them some likes and comments as well, including this clip from Friday's episode with Kamali Rose and his answer to white leftists telling black leftists how to organize and gatekeeping to the right. And my goal is to get at least a minimum of 2 clips from each episode, and 3 sometimes. And if it's a really good show, I'll go as high as 4 or 5. Also, don't forget to follow the Rochford Files on Twitch. I will eventually be working on a setup where I'll be mostly exclusive from Twitch, but I still need to fix some issues. Last Wednesday's episode, for example, for some reason, that never saved on Twitch when I went live via Twitch Studio. So I have to work on getting set up in Streamlabs. And also, if YouTube and Twitch don't fall under your preferences, go like the Rochford Files on Facebook. The reason why Facebook's the number 3 platform at the moment is because of that's a site where people are propagandized to the right. And even though Facebook, it's hard for left-wing content to gain real traction, you have to be able to still challenge it. But if you go into any political post on Facebook, you'll just see it's right-wing dominated. Then the liberals who do comment on it often are complicit in punching down on themselves as well. And one of the important principles of being someone on the left and against this 2-party system is to always punch up and work to fight for the other 99%. So don't forget, and also follow on Twitter at NugLifeComrade, NUGGLIFE Comrade, as it's up on the screen right now if you're watching. Then I also have a show page for the Rochford Files at a Rochford Files on Twitter. There's only like 1 or 2 degrees of separation between the show page and my regular Twitter account at the moment. But as I eventually build the show up, you'll see greater separation from my account and the show account. That's all for today on the Rochford Files with your host, Andrew Rochford. Enjoy your night, and I'll be back here for more at the regular start time of 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday. Goodbye. And